The storm arrived without mercy, rolling across the prairie like a living thing with teeth. Wind howled through Dust Creek, bending fence posts and rattling loose shingles until the town sounded like it was breaking apart piece by piece. Lanterns flickered in windows, then vanished as families shuttered themselves in. By nightfall, the sky had darkened to a bruised gray, and rain fell in hard, slanting sheets that soaked the ground faster than it could drink. Naomi Carter stood in the street, with the storm tearing at her skirts, her breath coming in short, painful bursts. She was a black woman of substance and presence, her body full and strong, shaped by years of work and endurance rather than softness. Tonight, that strength was being tested. The boarding house behind her groaned like a wounded animal. A beam split with a sound like a gunshot, and water surged through the doorway where she had lived in careful quiet for years. She clutched her lesson book to her chest, the leather cover already swollen with rain. It was the only thing she had managed to save. Clothes, letters, keepsakes, all swallowed by the chaos behind her. When she turned, the house shuddered again, and Naomi knew with a clarity that chilled her deeper than the rain that she could not go back. The street was empty. No doors opened, no voices called her name. Naomi lifted her face into the wind, rain streaking down her cheeks so no one could tell if she was crying. In Dust Creek, she had learned early not to expect rescue. A black woman alone learned to be her own shelter. But tonight, the cold bit too deep, and pride could not keep her alive. Then she saw it. Beyond the edge of town, where the prairie stretched wide and dark, a single light burned steady. It did not flicker or bow to the wind. It held fast, a warm gold square against the night. Isaiah Holt's ranch. Her heart tightened. Isaiah Holt was a giant of a man, tall and broad, known for his quiet ways and solitary life. Folks spoke of him with a mix of respect and distance. He helped when help was needed, then disappeared back into his land. Naomi had exchanged no more than polite greetings, nods on the street, brief words at church. He was a white bachelor living alone, and she was a black schoolteacher whose reputation was already a fragile thing in a small town that watched too closely. She hesitated only a moment. Another gust slammed into her, nearly knocking her off her feet. Naomi set her jaw and started walking. Each step through the mud was heavy, her skirts dragging, rain soaking her to the skin. The prairie offered no cover, no mercy. By the time she reached the porch, her hands were numb, her body shaking with cold she could no longer fight. She raised her hand and knocked. Inside, Isaiah Holt had been feeding the fire when the sound reached him. It cut through the storm with sharp insistence. He frowned, straightened to his full height, and crossed the room in long strides. No one came out this way at night, not in weather like this. His hand went to the bolt, and when he pulled the door open, the sight before him stopped him cold. Naomi Carter stood on his porch, drenched and trembling, her full frame bowed under exhaustion. Wet hair clung to her face and neck. Her dark eyes, wide and shining, met his with a mix of fear and resolve. She looked like someone who had walked through the end of the world and kept going anyway. Isaiah did not ask a single question. He reached for the thick quilt hanging by the door and wrapped it around her shoulders, his large hands careful, almost reverent. The wool was warm, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. Naomi gasped as the heat touched her skin, her knees weakening despite her effort to stay upright. "Come inside," Isaiah said, his voice low and steady, "before the cold cuts you through." Those words, plain, unadorned, felt like a hand closing around her spine, holding her up. Naomi stepped over the threshold, leaving the storm howling outside. The door shut behind her, and suddenly there was only firelight and warmth and the solid presence of the man beside her. She sank into a chair near the hearth, the quilt pulled tight around her shoulders, her lesson book still clutched like a lifeline.
Isaiah poured tea with deliberate calm, steam rising as he handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed for the briefest second, and Naomi felt the contact all the way down to her bones. The room was simple, but cared for. Books lined a shelf. A chessboard sat unfinished on a small table. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone, but not carelessly. "I'm sorry," Naomi managed, her voice hoarse. "The house, it collapsed. I had nowhere else." Isaiah set another log on the fire, watching the flames catch before turning back to her. His blue eyes held no judgment, no curiosity sharpened into scrutiny, only concern. "You're safe here. That's all that matters." The storm beat against the walls, furious and unrelenting. Inside, Naomi felt the shaking in her body slowly ease. For the first time since she had stepped into the rain, she breathed without pain. Isaiah watched her over the rim of his own cup, something unspoken settling between them. The night had thrown her into his path, and neither of them yet knew the cost or the promise of that knock on his door. Outside, Dust Creek bent beneath the storm. Inside, fate had already begun to change.
Morning came too clean. The sky over Dust Creek was a sharp, unbroken blue, as if the night before had been a lie. Sunlight glinted off puddles and broken boards, illuminating damage with cruel honesty. Fences lay flat, shingles littered the road. The boarding house stood half-collapsed, its ruin already drawing quiet onlookers. Naomi Carter walked the main street with her back straight and her chin lifted. She had borrowed a dress from Isaiah Holt's late mother's trunk, simple, modest, freshly pressed. It fit her full body imperfectly, but she wore it with the same dignity she carried everywhere. Only those who looked closely could see the tightness in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched around the strap of her satchel. Eyes followed her. Not the open stares of curiosity, but the sideways glances that cut deeper. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. In Dust Creek, a woman did not need to explain herself for people to decide her story. A black woman needed even less. "She spent the night at Holt's place," someone murmured near the general store. "Alone," another voice added, soft with implication. Naomi did not slow. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, unchanged by gossip. Its weathered boards and crooked steps greeted her like old friends. When she opened the door, children poured in behind her, laughter bright and unburdened. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Her stern expression softened just a little. "Good morning," she replied, voice steady. For hours she was only a teacher again. Chalk dust clung to her fingers. Numbers and letters filled the board. Small hands shot into the air, eager and trusting. The storm, the night, the whispers, all of it faded beneath the rhythm of learning. But peace in Dust Creek never lasted longer than the bell. When the last child ran off, Naomi stacked her books slowly, buying herself time. The silence pressed in. Outside, footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. Not a child's hurried patter. A knock sounded. Naomi turned. Jeremiah Blackwell stood in the doorway, polished boots untouched by mud, vest crisp despite the town's disarray. His smile was practiced, polite, and empty of warmth. He removed his hat as though entering a church. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, "I trust you survived the storm?" Naomi inclined her head. "I did. What brings you here, Mr. Blackwell?" He stepped inside without waiting for invitation, his eyes sweeping the room, the desks, the chalkboard, the space she ruled during daylight hours. When his gaze returned to her, it sharpened. "I hear you've had trouble." Trouble has a way of finding those without protection. Naomi felt the trap close even before he sprang it. "If you're referring to gossip, it does not concern my work." Blackwell chuckled softly. "My dear, in a town like this, reputation is the work."
He moved closer, lowering his voice. "One night at Isaiah Holt's ranch, and people begin to question your judgment, your morality. Parents get nervous. Boards reconsider contracts." Her hands tightened around the book she held. "I sought shelter from a storm. I did nothing wrong." Truth is a delicate thing. Belief is heavier. He let the silence stretch, then smiled again. "But there is a solution." Naomi's pulse quickened. "I'm listening." "Marry me." The word landed like a blow. Naomi stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" "My name carries weight," he continued calmly. "With me, the whispers vanish. You remain the respectable schoolteacher. You live comfortably. You are protected." "And in return?" Naomi asked, though she already knew. Blackwell's eyes flicked over her, assessing, calculating. "In return, I gain a wife who fits the image I require. Educated, proper, a woman who makes my standing unquestionable." Naomi took a step back, heat rising in her chest. "You're offering to buy my silence." "I'm offering you survival," he corrected. "This town does not forgive easily, especially not women, especially not you." The cruelty beneath his civility was unmistakable now. "No," Naomi said. The word surprised even her with steadiness. Blackwell's smile thinned. "Think carefully, Miss Carter. Pride is expensive." He placed his hat back on his head and turned for the door. "I will not ask again." When he left, the schoolhouse felt smaller. Naomi sank into her chair, breath shallow. Outside, the whispers continued, fed now by something sharper than rumor, threat. She left the schoolhouse as the sun dipped low, her steps carrying her not towards her rented ruin, but west, towards the only place she felt steady enough to stand, Isaiah Holt's ranch. The fire was lit when she entered, casting long shadows across the walls. Isaiah looked up at the sound of the door, his expression darkening when he saw her face. "I heard," he said quietly. Naomi set her satchel down with shaking hands. "He came to the school." Isaiah's jaw tightened. What did he want? She told him everything. When she finished, silence filled the room, heavy as a held breath. Isaiah stood, his broad frame tense, hands clenching once before stilling. "This town doesn't get to do this to you." Naomi laughed softly, bitter. "It already has." Isaiah turned to face her fully. His eyes burned, not with anger alone, but with resolution. "Marry me." The words were blunt, unpolished, nothing like Blackwell's offer. Naomi looked up sharply. "Isaiah?" "I won't let him corner you. Not your name, not your life. I don't have his money, but I have a house and land, and I won't stand by while he treats you like leverage." Her heart thundered. "They'll say you did it out of pity, or worse." Isaiah shook his head. "Let them talk." The fire cracked loudly, punctuating the moment. Naomi studied his face, searching for calculation, for pride. She found none. Only a man standing squarely between her and the storm. "Yes," she said at last. Isaiah exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath the entire time. Outside, Dust Creek whispered and watched. Inside, a decision had been made that would not be undone.
Night settled over the prairie with deceptive calm. The storm clouds had moved on, but the air still carried their memory, heavy and damp, as if the land itself had not yet exhaled. Isaiah Holt's ranch stood quiet against the dark, lantern light glowing warm through the windows, a steady promise against the vastness beyond. Inside, Naomi Carter stood near the hearth, her hands folded at her waist, her thoughts anything but still. The decision she had spoken aloud earlier echoed through her like a struck bell. Yes, one word, simple and irrevocable. She had agreed to marry Isaiah Holt, not out of desperation,
not as a bargain, but as a refusal to be bent. Still, the weight of it pressed on her chest. Marriage in Dust Creek was never private. It was spectacle, judgment, and permanence all down together. Isaiah moved quietly about the room, his large frame careful, as if afraid to startle her. He poured water into a basin, set out a clean towel, then stepped back, giving her space. "You can wash up," he said. "You don't owe me anything tonight. Not explanations, not decisions beyond what's already said." Naomi looked at him then, really looked. He was a giant of a man, broad shoulders filling the lamplight, hands rough from years of labor. Yet there was nothing imposing in the way he stood now. He kept his distance, his gaze steady but gentle, as if he were anchoring himself so she wouldn't have to. "Thank you," she said softly. She washed in silence, the warm water easing the ache from her hands and face. When she returned, Isaiah had laid out clothes on the chair, an old shirt of his father's, clean but worn thin with age. The trousers were loose, meant to be held up by suspenders. "They're the only things I had that wouldn't—" He stopped, then shrugged. "They'll do." Naomi hesitated, then nodded. She changed behind the small partition, feeling strange and vulnerable and unexpectedly safe. When she stepped back into the room, the shirt hung long over her hips, skimming the curves of her body. The trousers bunched at the waist, comically large. She looked like herself and not herself all at once. Isaiah glanced up and then quickly away, a faint color touching his cheeks. "You look comfortable," he said after a moment. She smiled just a little. "I feel it." They sat across from one another, the fire between them. Tea steamed gently, untouched. Outside, the wind murmured low, no longer a threat, just a presence. Naomi broke the silence. "I've spent years being careful where I stood, careful how I spoke, careful not to give anyone a reason." Isaiah nodded, and they took reasons anyway. "Yes," her voice caught, then steadied. "I'm tired." The word held more than exhaustion. It held grief, restraint, long loneliness. Isaiah heard it all. "You don't have to be strong here, not tonight," he said. She looked down at her hands. "That's what frightens me." Isaiah rose slowly and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. He did not touch her, he only spoke, his voice lowered as if the night itself were listening. "Naomi," he said, "I won't pretend to know all the ways the world's weighed on you, but I know this: no one should have to stand alone when the storm's already passed through them." Her breath shuddered. "Stay," he continued, then, quieter, more vulnerable than before. "Stay in my bed tonight, not because you owe me, not because of what we said earlier, only because you shouldn't have to face the dark by yourself." The words were an offering, not a claim. Naomi lifted her gaze to his. In his eyes she saw no hunger sharpened into demand, no expectation of reward, only concern and something deeper, respect held steady by restraint. "Yes," she whispered. Isaiah swallowed, then nodded once as if sealing a vow with himself. They prepared for sleep without haste. He banked the fire low, she folded the quilt. When they lay down, there was space between them at first, the bed wide and unfamiliar. Naomi lay on her side, staring at the wall, listening to the sound of his breathing, slow and even. Minutes passed. Then Isaiah shifted, hesitant. "Is this all right?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the space between them. Naomi turned to him. In the dim light, his face was softened by shadow, lines of worry etched deep. She reached out, her hand resting on his forearm, solid, warm. "Closer," she said. He moved with care, sliding nearer, his arm settling around her back without pulling, without pressure. Naomi let herself sink into him, her body fitting against his like something long denied rest. For the first time in years, her mind did not race. The whispers, the threats, the eyes of the town, all of it faded beneath the simple truth of another heartbeat beside hers. Isaiah's hand rested still at her shoulder. He murmured, "If anything feels wrong, say so." She nodded against his chest. "I will." They lay like that, breathing together, the fire's last embers glowing faintly. Naomi felt something unfamiliar unfold inside her, not passion, not fear, but release. The careful walls she had built did not crumble, they simply opened a door. Sleep came gently. Outside, Dust Creek lay quiet, unaware that within a modest ranch house, two lives had shifted in a way no rumor could undo. And for the first time in a long while, Naomi Carter rested without guarding her heart.
The first notice arrived folded, crisp, and red-stamped, carried by a boy too young to understand the weight of what he delivered. By midday, Dust Creek felt smaller. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of the schoolyard, watching children run through dust that still smelled faintly of rain. Their laughter rose and fell, unknowing. She held a paper in her hand now, passed to her quietly by Mrs. Brennan that morning, fingers trembling as if it might burn. Debt called due, payable immediately. It was not the only one. By afternoon, whispers had changed shape. No longer about Naomi, no longer about the night at Isaiah Holt's ranch. This new fear pressed deeper, reaching into homes and fields, into land worked by generations. Families gathered in hushed knots, clutching identical papers, eyes hollow with the same question. How? Why now? Naomi heard it from the children. "Ma cried last night," little Clara Weller said, her voice careful, as if loudness might shatter something fragile. "Pa says we might lose the farm." Naomi knelt so their eyes met. She wanted to say something reassuring, something true. Instead, she placed a steady hand on Clara's shoulder and nodded. "I'm glad you told me," she said. "You did right." When the bell rang, Naomi dismissed the class early. The room emptied slowly, children lingering, sensing a change they could not name. When the door closed at last, she remained standing at the lectern, staring at the chalkboard as if answers might appear there. They did not. That evening, Isaiah arrived with the weight of the town written across his face. He removed his hat slowly, dust falling to the floor, and leaned it against the wall. "They've all got notices," he said. "Brennans, Millers, Petersons, even folks who never missed a payment." Naomi turned to him. "Blackwell." Isaiah nodded. "He's bought their debts, quietly. Now he's calling them due all at once." Her chest tightened. "He's strangling the town." "Yes," Isaiah said, "and he knows exactly what he's doing." They sat by the fire, silence heavy. Naomi pressed her palms together, thinking of the children's faces, the trust they placed in her each morning. "They'll leave," she said finally. "Families will pack what they can and go." Isaiah stared into the flames. "Some already are." The thought struck like a physical blow. "And the school?" "Will close," he answered, "along with everything else that can't stand without people." Naomi rose abruptly and crossed the room. She opened her lesson book, flipping past sums and spelling lists until she reached the final page. There, in careful handwriting, she wrote a single line: "Some storms come not from the sky, but from the hearts of men." Isaiah read it over her shoulder. "To face a storm like that, you need something stronger than shelter." She met his gaze. "Truth." He nodded once. "Yes." That night, Isaiah did not stay. Naomi watched from the porch as he mounted his horse and disappeared into the dark, dust lifting behind him. He had said only, "I need to be sure," before leaving. No explanation beyond that. The hours crawled. Naomi kept the lamp lit, the fire low.
Every sound made her heart stutter, the creak of wood, the wind against the shutters. She imagined Isaiah riding through danger, imagined Blackwell's reach extending farther than anyone knew. When dawn came, pale and red, hoofbeats thundered up the drive. Naomi was at the door before the knock. Isaiah stood there, exhaustion carved deep into his face, clothes dust-streaked, eyes burning with resolve. In his hands was a thick leather bundle, tied tight. "Come inside," she said, her voice shaking. He laid the bundle on the table and untied it carefully. Papers spilled out, letters, maps, stamped documents. Naomi stared as recognition flickered across seals and signatures. "What is this?" she whispered. "Proof," Isaiah said. "Bribes, forged land claims, letters tying Blackwell to judges and bankmen. I took them from his office." Her breath caught. "You broke into his house?" Isaiah did not deny it. "I broke into a lie." Naomi touched the papers with trembling fingers. "If he'd caught you," Isaiah said simply, "he didn't, and now he won't catch anyone else unarmed." She looked at him then, truly seeing the man before her, not just a rancher, not just her soon-to-be husband, but someone shaped by fire and loss, willing to walk back into danger for the sake of others. "You did this for me," she said. Isaiah shook his head. "I did it for Dust Creek, and for you, because I won't watch you carry this alone." The weight in her chest shifted. Fear remained, but it was joined now by something else, fragile, fierce hope. "Then we speak," Naomi said, "publicly." Isaiah nodded. "At the schoolhouse, where everyone can see." That night, lamps burned late across Dust Creek. People gathered quietly, summoned by word of mouth and worry. Benches were dragged in. The air inside the schoolhouse was thick with tension, and breath held too long. When Jeremiah Blackwell entered, dressed sharp and confident, he believed he still owned the room. He did not. As Isaiah laid the evidence on the teacher's desk, the balance shifted. Papers passed from hand to hand. Voices rose, not in chaos, but in dawning understanding. The sheriff stepped forward, recognition darkening his face. "This is real," he said. The words rippled through the room like thunder after lightning. Naomi stood beside Isaiah, her hand steady in his. She did not shout, she did not accuse, she only watched as truth, long buried, finally broke the surface. Outside, the wind lifted dust into the night sky. Inside, Dust Creek began to stand.
Sunday dawned with bells. They rang from the small white church at the center of Dust Creek, their sound uneven but determined, as if the metal itself were relearning its purpose. People came from every direction, some on foot, some by wagon, some still carrying the marks of worry in their shoulders. They filled the pews not out of habit, but out of witness. This was not just a wedding. It was a reckoning. Naomi Carter stood in the narrow room behind the altar, hands folded, breath measured. Her dress was simple ivory, borrowed lace mended carefully by 3 women who had once whispered behind her. Now they had stitched in silence, their needles moving with reverence. Mrs. Brennan adjusted Naomi's collar gently. "You look beautiful," she said, her voice thick. Naomi met her eyes in the mirror. "Thank you for standing with me." Mrs. Brennan swallowed. "We should have done it sooner." Outside, the doors creaked open. Isaiah Holt waited at the altar, shoulders squared, jaw set. He wore his father's suit, altered but still carrying the weight of history. His hands were steady, though his heart beat loud enough to feel in his ribs. He was not afraid of marriage. He was afraid of failing what this moment meant. The congregation shifted when Jeremiah Blackwell was escorted in, not as a guest, but as a man under guard. The sheriff stood close, papers folded in his hand. Blackwell's confidence had collapsed inward, his face pale, his smile gone. The pastor cleared his throat. "We gather today," he began, "not only to join two lives, but to bear witness to truth." Naomi stepped forward then, walking the aisle alone. Each step echoed. Each face she passed held something different: regret, pride, apology, resolve. She did not look away. When she reached Isaiah, he turned to her fully, and for the first time that morning, his breath eased. They stood before the altar not as refuge for one another, but as equals choosing the same ground. The vows were plain: no grand promises, no flourishes. Isaiah spoke first. "I vow to stand beside you when standing costs something, to listen when the world tries to silence you, to build a home where you never have to ask permission to rest." Naomi's voice did not shake. "I vow to walk with you in truth, even when it is heavy, to speak when quiet would be easier, to choose you, not as shelter, but as partner." When the pastor declared them married, the sound that followed was not applause. It was breath released. Outside the church, sunlight poured down, warm and unapologetic. The bells rang again, louder this time. Children laughed. Someone cried openly. Naomi stepped into the light beside Isaiah, her hand in his. And then the sheriff cleared his throat. "Jeremiah Blackwell, by order of the county court, you are hereby arrested on charges of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy." Blackwell's eyes darted, searching for allies. He found none. As he was led away, Naomi did not look at him. She had already spent enough of her life in the shadow of men like him. The reception was modest, tables set outside, food shared freely. Laughter returned cautiously at first, then with growing ease. Naomi moved among her students, kneeling to their height, listening to their stories. "You're staying?" Clara asked, hope bright in her eyes. Naomi smiled. "I am." Isaiah watched her from across the yard, a quiet smile tugging at his mouth. This was the life he had dared to imagine. As the sun dipped low, the crowd thinned. Dishes were cleared. Goodbyes lingered. At last, only the quiet remained. That evening, Naomi and Isaiah returned to the ranch together. Inside, the house felt different, not larger, but fuller. Naomi removed her shoes and stood barefoot on the wooden floor, taking it in. "This is ours," Isaiah said softly. She nodded. Yes. They shared supper by lamplight, the ordinary act made sacred by choice. When night settled, Naomi paused at the doorway of the bedroom. "For so long I thought survival was the same thing as living." Isaiah met her gaze. "And now?" She stepped forward, resting her hand over his heart. "Now I know better." They lay down together, unguarded. No space was needed between them now. Isaiah's arm wrapped around her, firm and sure. Naomi rested her head against him, listening to the steady truth of his breathing. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and open, no storm in sight. Dust Creek slept, not under threat, not under silence, but under something newly earned. And in the center of it all, a woman once cornered by rumor now lay vindicated, not by rescue, but by her own voice, her own choosing, and a love that never asked her to shrink.